Hi, welcome to my channel, or welcome back, hopefully. I'm Chris, and if you're new around here, I love talking about films and books. I love making videos and watching videos about people talking about books and films, and maybe you do too, and that is exactly why you're here. Before I get started, I want to say a huge hello to all the newcomers here at the channel. The algorithm gods have been kind to my top 5 books video that I released at the start of this channel, and I've had like a huge influx of comments and subscribers, so if you've watched that video and now you're watching this one, welcome, and thank you to everyone that's been watching. This is great, seeing so much input on a video about books that everyone loves, basically. That's what this channel is all about. It's just about talking about things that we like, basically, and no negativity. All that said, I've been in somewhat of a reading slump recently. Like most summer times, life gets busy. It's really hot and sticky in London. It's been too hot to even film in my flat. The days get really long and sometimes I'm finding that the motivation to read is really lacking or challenging, especially when like you're not on a beach somewhere in Italy or something and you're just in London and you're trying to get on with your life. So I figured it'd be a good idea to do a little reading slump list, or books that kind of got me out of reading slumps in the past, or books that might get you out of a reading slump if you're in one currently. But really, I think this is just an excuse to talk about 5 easygoing books that I personally found really readable and enjoyable, and you might as well. So much so that I think these books could get anybody out of a reading slump. So, without further ado, top of my list is The Science of the Lambs by Thomas Harris. I think more than anything, the best thing to read when you're in a reading slump is probably something that's been adapted into a popular movie or TV show. I know that's quite shallow or sort of trite, but you know, if it wasn't this book in particular, I would have picked something like Call Me By Your Name, because I really, really loved that. Or maybe something like The Talented Mr. Ripley, which I've not read, but I hear is really good, and I really love the film, and I really want to read the book. But just because for me personally, a lot of the like quote-unquote hard work that comes with reading a book is kind of mostly done for you when it's a book of a film that you really like. So I find that just books that have been adapted into your favourite films are kind of a really nice gateway into getting back into the swing of reading. All that said though, if this hadn't been adapted into a film, or you know, like a TV show with Hannibal, it's still an insanely readable and riveting story, while still not compromising on being really well written as well. I think sometimes there's an element of like, when something's readable, it's not really particularly well written, or it's just quite of an easy read. But I think, from memory, this is still really well written. I actually read this whilst I was on holiday in Japan back in April. And normally when you do like a city break, you do just kind of think like, there's no way I'm going to read a book on this trip. Like, I'm going to end every day absolutely exhausted. I'm just going to want to go straight to sleep. But I absolutely flew through this on that holiday. I couldn't wait to read this at night. And, you know, we read it on the Shinkansen as well, and read it on the train and the underground, and it just was such a good book to pick up and put down. The chapters are really short and riveting. Hannibal Lecter is obviously just such an interesting character. Clarice Starling is also a really solid protagonist. And the themes of like gender identity and gender politics throughout the story are so prominent and interesting. I think I go into a little bit more detail on this in my Arrow Blu-ray collection video, which you can watch after this video if you like. But overall, the tone of the story is so moody without being too depressing to read, if that makes sense. You know, sometimes when you get like crime thrillers, or you get kind of like, you know, murder mysteries, there is an element of like just sheer bleakness to the story where it's like, okay, we're going to watch Silence of the Lambs, but this isn't really going to be a fun time. But there's something about this book that just kind of is. You know, it's moody, but it's not too dark and horrible. And I think because of the film, we have this idea in our head of the story being kind of a real artifact of the 90s, when actually it was written and is set in the 80s. I don't really think that really matters much, but it just kind of makes you think, doesn't it? Like, when we think about like 90s movies and like, you know, American movies of the 90s and the imagery of those kind of films, we do think about things like Fight Club, Seven, American Beauty, Silence of the Lambs. Like, they're all up there as kind of like these big 90s cultural moments. But the book is just quite timeless feeling, really. It's not really rooted in any one specific time. And I kind of felt that way with Red Dragon as well. I think maybe that one's even kind of set more in the late 70s, but again, they just feel so timeless. And I think that's helped massively by the themes of the book as well. It does just feel a little bit ahead of its time, basically. But yeah, anyway, I pretty much never read crime or murder mystery stories. I really want to read more, so if there's any like crime or like detective books or noir books that you think that I would really enjoy because I like Silence of the Lambs, please let me know in the comments, because every time I go into a bookshop or a charity bookshop and you see this like massive crime and thriller section. It's so hard to know which one of those is actually worth reading because they all look quite similar. They're all page turner. I think they're just made to be page turners, aren't they? If you're in a reading slump, this is absolutely a must read and gets a really big recommendation from me. Moving on though, we've got A Short Stay in Hell by Stephen L. Peck. This is a copy my partner picked up in Pal's City of Books when we visited Portland in October. It's an incredibly short novella, like it's so thin, and I think this copy in particular as well is quite like, yeah, it's quite like a large font too. It's almost like something you would like read in like school maybe, you know, with it being just kind of a bit more friendly and accessible. The writing style is really, really easy to digest. So if you're looking for something quick to fly through, then this should be very high on your list. I think this copy in particular is literally like 100 pages long, if that. And it could be even shorter if the font was smaller and the pages were smaller. To give you a brief description, it's about a character who has just recently died and has found themselves sent to their own personal hell along with, you know, an infinite number of people as well. And the main character's own personal hell is an infinite library containing every book that has ever been written throughout eternity. And he is allowed to leave hell if he finds a book that exactly retells his life story without spelling mistakes or errors. I don't really want to give too much of the book away because that is kind of the sort of driving force of the narrative, but basically what we get is a really broad whistle-stop tour of someone's experience in eternity with other people living through their own private hell. And I don't really want to say much more, but it kind of made me think about things like The Mist by Stephen King, just where it's like, you know, we've got a group of people in this situation that has certain rules and has certain limitless opportunities. You know, what's going to happen in that kind of scenario? Like if people are left to their own devices for eternity, what's going to happen? I've got to mention that people really, really love this novella, and it wasn't exactly for me. Like, I thought it was fine. It was enjoyable. It was indeed a book that I read when I didn't really know what to read next, and it, you know, it kind of filled that gap quite nicely. It was a good like palate cleanser between books. So for that reason alone, it deserves a chance, you know, if you're stuck in a reading slump. But immediately after reading it, you should give it to somebody else that likes reading that you can talk to about. Because this book does touch on some really interesting themes and topics and like existential concepts that I think make for really good conversation. So I think my experience of enjoying this book came from talking about it with my partner because she had read it before me, you know, more so than actually reading the book itself. I think people call it like a psychological horror, and it kind of is sort of a horror story, but it's a lot broader and existential than that. It also reminded me of the film A Ghost Story by, what's his name? Gonna have to Google it. David Lowery, that's it. It reminded me of A Ghost Story by David Lowery. Just when, you know, stories kind of transcend the boundaries of like the human experience and time, and they kind of prod and poke at the idea of eternity and infinity as well. So if you liked A Ghost Story, you might like A Short Stay in Hell. If you're in a reading slump, you should read A Short Stay in Hell. Thirdly, I also want to recommend Taste by Stanley Tucci. Now, I bet your usual book talkers and booktubers aren't mentioning Taste by Stanley Tucci. You know, we're all talking about The Count of Monte Cristo and Lonesome Dove and John Steinbeck, and everybody's talking about the Odyssey and the Iliad right now, but you should read The Taste by Stanley Tucci if you're in a reading slump. I went through this phase like last year where we watched all of his like Taste of Italy documentaries on Amazon Prime and Disney Plus. My partner is from Italy, so we go there a lot, and it's just nice to watch and, you know, talk about, and she has a lot of like, she sort of recognizes a lot of the things and places and foods and, you know, cultural backgrounds and stuff. And I just don't really know what came over me. Like, I get that Stanley Tucci is a massive national treasure, both for the UK and, you know, America, but I just felt really compelled to read one of his books after watching that show. You know, I do a lot of the cooking in the house, and I go in and out of being kind of passionate and sort of energized by it. And I don't know, I just found watching those shows and reading this book made me fall back in love for cooking for loved ones again, and just sort of cooking in general as a kind of activity. But, you know, all that aside, it's obviously just a really readable book. It's very conversational in its writing style. It's part memoir, part recipe book, part book about food in general. And overall, it just has a really strong sense of voice, and Stanley Tucci's personality really shines through in the book as well. There's also lots of nice little tidbits about his kind of filmmaking journey, some deeper bits about his personal life, which are quite revealing and quite upsetting, but also quite heartwarming to hear. But overall, it's just a really nice celebration of food and his relationship with it, and our relationship with food as well. Like, it kind of is a really nice way to show your love for someone. It brings people together, it brings family together, and, a lot of your memories can actually be traced by food experiences and so on. So yeah, it's a bit of a rogue choice. I feel like it's not really the kind of thing that, like, a YouTuber would recommend, because we're all trying to look really smart and interesting. But I think Taste by Stanley Tucci is genuinely worth your time if you're in a reading slump. I do really love a good non-fiction book from time to time, and I find that they can be really easy to get into because they're kind of grounded in reality rather than needing to kind of imagine the world building or kind of follow a writer's tone of voice. It's very just like, I feel like I'm listening to Stanley Tucci talk about food, and that's nice. And it will absolutely get you out of a reading slump. And then for the fourth book, this is a bit of a cheat. I think my last two books are cheating, really. But I was just going to say, insert John Steinbeck book here by John Steinbeck, and I've kind of got a little pinch of Steinbeck books. This isn't really any one specific recommendation, but I don't know what it is, but I think maybe 3 out of 5 times when I found myself in a reading slump, I've turned to John Steinbeck, and I've kind of done it with no researching which one's worth reading or watching loads of YouTubers and what they have to say about it. I've just found a John Steinbeck book, picked it up, and just started reading it without even worrying about what it's about or how long it is or, all the kind of context around it. And I've typically turned to one of his shorter ones, of which there are many. Like, there's something about his writing that is actually, at times, relatively challenging and thoughtful, but mostly his characters and his ability to tell a story and set a scene is so engaging and so readable. I'd confidently say almost anything by him is worth reading to get out of a reading slump. And I'm not saying go and read Grapes of Wrath or East of Eden to get out of a reading slump, because they are long and they are kind of commitments, but there's so many short books to choose from by him. You've got Of Mice and Men, The Pearl, Tortilla Flat, Cannery Row, The Winter of Our Discontent, The Red Pony, I've not read. Literally anything. They're all bangers. I mean, come on, like, if you've watched any of my videos, you kind of know that I'm a bit of a John Steinbeck head. Travels with Charlie is a really great travel log that's, really worth reading. One of my favourite books I've ever read. Cannery Row wasn't my favourite by his, but again, really short, really readable, really fun. Really low stakes as well. The Winter of Our Discontent is also one of my favourites by his, and a bit of a kind of dark horse in his bibliography. This one's kind of more of a modern, contemporary sort of story of a family and wealth and fortune and kind of, when you sort of think that you deserve better or you deserve more and you don't have enough, and what is fortune and what is wealth, and does it ever make anybody happy? Really, really good book. The Moon is Down, one that I've not read yet, but I'm going to, because look how thin that book is. I think this one's kind of a bit of a, maybe it's a non-fiction book, I'm not entirely sure, but it's kind of a piece of Allied propaganda during World War II that John Steinbeck wrote, and it's about a town in France getting occupied by the Nazis. So again, just kind of a bit of a different speed. There's something for everyone in John Steinbeck's collection, and we read Of Mice and Men in school back in the day, and I think if you're looking for something really short and prolific and classic, or a modern classic, then look no further than John Steinbeck, really. Some of the books I've mentioned are kind of like easy reads or kind of accessible reads, but sometimes it is just good to read something that is actually a little bit literary and accomplished, that you can kind of read and think, yeah, I've achieved something by reading that. I've learned something, or I've grown a little bit from reading that book, maybe, because digesting art is good for you. Art is really good for you. And then lastly, this one is also a bit of a cop-out answer. It's not really any one book in particular, but the fifth book I want to recommend is just anything you like, really. Or more specifically, read something that you're passionate about at the moment. Read something that is like tangential to something that you're really into currently. I don't know if you're like this, but for me personally, when I'm in a reading slump, I tend to just follow my heart at any given moment. I've recently been playing a lot of Elden Ring, so I've been watching lots of videos about From Software and Bloodborne and Dark Souls, and I just saw so much chat online about how Hidetaka Miyazaki, who's kind of like the director of From Software, is directly inspired by the manga Berserk. And we're kind of in our sort of anime phase at the moment, and I just thought, do you know what? I really, really want to read Berserk. So I just got it off Vinted, secondhand, and I've been kind of slowly making my way through it. And there's just no better feeling than wanting to read something and then just picking it up and doing it. That is the best time to get out of a reading slump. I got into climbing and bouldering off the back of watching Free Solo on Disney Plus a few years back. So I read a book about, the climbing scene that talked about Alex Honnold and his climb up El Capitan. I recently started watching Gary Stevenson on YouTube, and he's kind of having a really big moment in UK politics, and so I went ahead and read his book just at the drop of a hat. I just saw the Odyssey at the cinema this week as well, and now I really want to go and read those Emily Wilson translations. Nothing gets me more pumped about reading a book than something out in the world that is not a book or that is not kind of, you know, book recommendations or top 10 books you should ever read, or you should absolutely read this book, stop everything you're doing and read this book, and if you haven't read this book then you're not a reader. You know, those kind of things are actually a bit intimidating. Does any of that make any sense? So yeah, I just think ask yourself, what are you into right now? What film have you watched that you really like that was maybe adapted from a book? What TV show have you been binging and just want to consume more of? You know, what hobby do you have, or what political movement are you following at the moment, or what moment in history are you learning about that you just want to know more about? Find the book that is about that thing and read it, and that will get you out of a reading slump. Because let me tell you something, if you like all those things, then you're going to absolutely love books at the end of it. Those are some books that got me out of a reading slump. Those are some methods that kind of get me out of reading slumps. Thanks again for watching. If you like this video and you're watching it on a mobile, click the hype button. There's like a hype button that you can click that helps with like reach and viewership. If you also like the vibe of this channel, please hit subscribe and like, and, you know, stick around for more. I'm really pleased that you're here, and I'm really, really thankful if you do choose to stick around. And, you know, I've mentioned things like Steinbeck and Science of the Lambs, and there's some other videos on this channel that kind of touch upon those topics too. So have a look around, stay a while, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye. Bye, 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 bye.